So good evening and welcome. Thank you for taking time out of your day to be with us here at our first public hearing concerning the new PFAS drinking water rules and our attempt to regulate PFAS in drinking water in the state of Michigan. I am Eric Oswald. I'm the director of the Drinking Water Environmental Health Division. I've got some help up here. I've got George Christian, who's the assistant director. So hopefully I'll get through this in less than 30 minutes. We'll have a little time for questions if you want to ask a quick question or two. So to start out, this is not, as James mentioned, not a formal part of the hearing, but we wanted to give you some background about PFAS in Michigan in particular and how we arrived at where we are today with the proposed MCLs and the rules for PFAS. Excuse me. So to begin with, I don't want to insult your intelligence, but what is PFAS? PFAS stands for per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. They're a group of man-made chemicals with a very strong carbon-fluorine bond, one of the strongest bonds known in nature. That's what makes these chemicals do what they do so well, resist heat, but they also persist in nature. They don't biodegrade very readily. They're very difficult to break down. They were developed in the 40s, and because of their unique properties, they were a wonder chemical. They did a lot of great things. However, they certainly didn't understand the implications of their production and how they affect the environment. And there are literally thousands of these compounds around. We're talking about just a very select few for which we have data. So some common abbreviations: never try to attempt organic chemistry in public. But as you see on the top line there, you've got perfluorooctanoic acid, or PFOA. The first two are probably the most commonly known in Michigan. It's what the EPA developed their 70 part per trillion standard on, was these two chemicals. And then you've got perfluorooctane sulfonate, which is PFOS. The other ones I'm not really going to go into. There's some of the ones that we're looking at regulating in Michigan, just examples of some of the chemical compounds. On the bottom, something interesting and new in Michigan is the hexafluoropropylene oxide dimer acid. This is a Gen X compound. Now, Gen X refers to a process, not an actual chemical. But these are some of the things, the shorter chains, carbon chains, that they came out with to replace some of the other older PFAS chemicals. PFAS uses, again, these things were used everywhere. You've got them in aerospace, you've got them in Teflon coatings and pans, herbicides and pesticide uses, food packaging. You go to McDonald's and you get your package and the grease doesn't go through. Well, that's because there used to be a PFAS chemical on there preventing that from happening. Dental floss, there's some brands of dental floss out there that have PFAS in them. You go to a car wash and you get a special chemical put on your car to have the water beat up. Sometimes that chemical has PFAS in it. Stain-resistant carpet, water-resistant clothing, all those things were developed with PFAS in them. So they're used everywhere. So why are we concerned about PFAS? Because they don't break down in nature, because they don't break down in our bodies, they tend to bioaccumulate. So exposures at the part per trillion level can lead to blood levels much higher than that, and at levels where we think there may be adverse health impacts. There's a general lack of information about these. There's a lot more study that needs to go on. So that and a lack of standards developed lead us to be concerned about these chemicals and henceforth the action that we're taking. How do we get to be exposed by PFAS chemicals? This is a drawing that I stole from MPART. It just shows PFAS being generated in the upper left there. You've got a paper plant or a carpet producer that's using PFAS, a plater. They have waste products. Those waste products either go out through a pipe to a water treatment plant that was never designed to treat PFAS and didn't have limits for discharging PFAS into receiving bodies, or there's waste that'll go right to a landfill. A shoe manufacturer, a paper company will take their scraps in the 60s and 70s, and they'd go right into a landfill, and sometimes those landfills weren't lined, they weren't very well designed, and so when the rain comes down through, those products in those landfills can leach directly into the drinking water, whether it be groundwater or surface water. So the down arrows kind of represent PFAS chemicals going into the environment. The up arrows uptake, be it through surface water or private well or groundwater, how they enter our systems. So short background, and again, a lot of you probably know more about this than I do. 2017, we had Wolverine Worldwide, kind of generated the start of PFAS awareness, if you will, in the state of Michigan, directly led to Governor Schneider developing the MPART, the Michigan PFAS Action Response Team, which was established in November of 2017. In 2018, we were directed to do some statewide drinking water sampling. We had a 3-year program. Fortunately, we received some funding from the legislature. We were able to condense that into an 8-month program. A lot of work went into that, to sampling a wide variety of public water systems in the state. And we had extra money from that, so we kind of expanded that. And those efforts are still ongoing. Some of those systems where we found PFAS above 10 parts per trillion but below 70, we've required them or asked them to do follow-on testing, and we're still doing that. Then we get to 2019 with Governor Whitmer's directive for us to create the MCLs by 1 October, which we did. So going on to that statewide sampling we did, we're very fortunate in the state of Michigan that the legislature gave us this money, that we have a lot of data on community water systems in the state. We had a contractor go out and sample all the community water systems and a large majority of the non-community water systems, non-community, non-transients. The thing that we were kind of surprised with is we had about 90% of non-detects. We thought if we sampled for this stuff, we're going to find it everywhere. We were pleasantly surprised to see about 90% non-detects. But you can see the numbers there for the results. We also offered the tribes to be sampled, and we had no detection on tribal land, so that was a good result. Just a real quick overview of the MCL process. We started out just listening to our stakeholder groups. We didn't put anything really on the table. We just wanted to gather what their concerns were, and I'll kind of show you what our stakeholder groups were. We then took all that information, we went back and we crafted some rules. We put those back out to the stakeholders, got comments on what they thought of those rules. We changed the rules, we revised them, and came up with a finalized draft of those rules. And then we presented those rules to the Environmental Rule Review Committee and others for acceptance. Now we're down into the public hearing part of that. I wanted to kind of go over the MCL process timeline in a little bit more depth, but in March of 2019 you had Governor Whitmer's directive to come up with the MCLs. The first step of that was directed at MPART. They had a science advisory work group that came up with health-based values for those chemicals they thought they had enough data on to develop those values. So they had 3 months to develop those values. The MPART executive board voted on those, accepted those numbers. Those were given to EGLE to start with as a starting point. And later I'll kind of tell you how we worked with those health-based values and developed those into MCLs. So we were given those health-based values. So we drafted the rules, we had the stakeholder meetings, and again we went before the Environmental Rules Review Committee to have them take a look at that. So just a quick overview of stakeholders that were involved. Even though this was done in a very short time frame, we had a fairly robust group of stakeholders involved. And I want to publicly thank them as we go through this list to show you who are involved, because they spent a lot of time in a short amount of time helping us go through this. So these are the basic 5 groups that we reached out to. You see here the industrial group and the health groups. I'll just leave that up there for a little bit so you can see who we actually reached out to provide us information and comments. We had a environmental group, so these groups also participated and helped us out. We had a municipalities group. This was a very important group because these are the individuals that operate most of the water treatment plants in the state. So these are the people that are going to have to deal with the implementation of these rules that we have developed. We made sure that we reached out to 2 water systems that had experience dealing with PFAS contamination, both a large system and a small system. So you'll see Plainfield Township and the city of Ann Arbor on there, both who have dealt with PFAS contamination. We wanted their experience. We also took MPART's Citizens Advisory Council. We held some stakeholder sessions with them and got some information, some input from them on the just their concerns and then on the draft rules. So excuse me. So how does the rule work? We went in and based the rule on an existing rule. We wanted to make this as easy for the water systems to implement as we possibly could. So we took existing rules that they use to sample for other chemicals and kind of crafted them to deal with PFAS. So very quickly, I'm going to go over who the rules apply to, the sampling requirements, how they report those results to EGLE. I'll go over the proposed MCLs and how we arrived at those. The compliance calculation, how do we determine if a system's violating the MCLs or is in compliance with the MCLs? If they're violating, what is the public notification requirements? The treatment technologies that we looked at to actually treat this, and then a laboratory certification requirement. So it's important to note that not all public water supplies in the state of Michigan have to comply with the new PFAS rules. These rules apply to systems where people get water on a routine basis over a long exposure period. So community water supplies, those are your large water systems, and then what we call non-transient, non-community supplies. Things like schools, large businesses where people are going back and drinking water for a long period. So there's about 2,700 of those in the state. We can require other systems to sample for PFAS if we have data that supports a suspicion that there may be contamination. So we can reach out and actually have the smaller system sample as well. The sampling requirements, again, we require the systems to sample finished water, so water after it's been treated, wherever it enters the distribution system. So we don't have a requirement in this rule to sample raw water. If we have detections and we have a concern that there may be contamination in the source water, we'll work with the Water Resources Division and we'll start sampling source water. But this rule does not require systems to sample their source water. We can require confirmation sampling. Because of the difficulty of sampling for PFAS, it lends itself to false positives. Because of the uses of PFAS, you can have issues where a sample can become contaminated. So if we see a sample that doesn't quite make sense, we can require resampling. Systems that have no data or have a sample that shows that they had a detection of PFAS, when the rule comes out, they are going to be required to immediately start sampling for PFAS in their finished water. So within they'll be subject to quarterly sampling. Systems where we had data and we had a non-detect, we're going to allow them 6 months before they start the quarterly sampling. This is to control the number of samples that are coming into the labs and allow them to build up their capacity, if you will, to analyze these samples. Ongoing samples, so systems will be in quarterly sampling unless they establish a track record of non-detection, or if they establish a consistent track record of consistent results that are below the MCL. They will be eligible at that time to go to annual sampling, but that's as long as we'll allow them under this rule to sample. And if they have a detection, if a system's under annual sampling and they wind up having a detection, they will automatically go back to quarterly sampling. So the sample results have to be reported to EGLE basically 10 days after the month in which they're taken, or 10 days after the month in which the monitoring period ends. So if the monitoring period ends on December 31st, they have until January 10th to get those results to EGLE. That's consistent with other rules. And then again, it's whichever is sooner. The proposed MCLs, so these are they wound up being the health-based values that the Science Advisory Work Group from MPART gave to us. We used basically 3 criteria to base our decision on whether to change those health-based criteria from that to the MCL. So in other words, if we had the 6, what would we look at if we wanted to raise that, or if we thought we needed to raise that to a different number? The 3 criteria were, can we detect to that level in drinking water? And for all these health-based values, we can clearly detect that with the current analytical capabilities that we have. The second question was, can we treat to that level? Is there technology out there that will actually remove these PFAS compounds to that level so that the supplies can comply with the MCL? And the answer to that question was yes. The third question was, is the cost benefit worth it? Is the price we're going to pay to install treatment worth the benefit we're going to get? And this is a very difficult question to answer. The cost, because we have a statewide sampling, we were very fortunate in Michigan. We had data to work with, and we have about 22 systems right now that would have trouble meeting these MCLs, so the cost estimate that you'll see later was based on those 22 systems installing treatment. Now, in all transparency, those systems are smaller systems, so the cost estimate is based on a relatively low volume of water being treated. So the answer to that question was the cost was worth the benefit to the health to the citizens of Michigan. So we answered all those questions positively, and the MCLs were left at the health-based values that the Science Advisory Work Group gave us. Compliance calculations are done in accordance with other drinking water rules. We have what we call a running annual average. So systems will sample quarterly. So I'll give an example for an MCL that's set at 8 parts per trillion. A system will immediately start sampling for that particular chemical. If they have multiple points of finished water, so you can have a system that has multiple entries to their distribution system. They have to sample at each point. One point being over the MCL can cause the system, so it doesn't need to be both. One point can cause the system to be over or have a violation of the MCL. And again, like I said before, any positive detection will result in that system going back, if they're an annual sampling, to quarterly sampling. We can require confirmation sampling. If a sample doesn't look right, we can ask the supply to go back and recalculate that. Just to give an example of what this running annual average is, if you have a system that's sampling quarterly, they'll take 4 samples for the year. At the end of that 4th sample, they'll do an average. So you'll take your total of the samples, divide it by 4. Excuse me, that's your running annual average. However, if a system takes a sample and it's over a certain amount where further non-detects will not allow them to get back under the MCL, they will be immediately out of compliance. We're not going to wait for those other 3 samples to come in before they're out of compliance with the MCL. So as an example, if you have an MCL of 8, the first quarterly sample is 16, they are not out of compliance with the MCL because the further quarterly sampling, if they're non-detect, could drop that running annual average below the MCL. However, if you have the MCL set at 8 parts per trillion, the supply tests at 50 parts per trillion for their first sample. Further non-detects will not drive that sampling running annual average under the MCL. So that supply will be immediately out of compliance with the MCL, and all the requirements will kick in at that point. Public notification is in standards with some of our other rules. If a supply is an exceedance of the MCL, there's a 30-day requirement for them to notify the public that they have exceeded the MCL, and that notification will require mandatory health language. Those communities that exceed the MCL also have to include that information in their annual water quality reports or their consumer confidence reports. As far as treatment technologies go, we looked at a variety of them. We use granular activated carbon as the basis for our cost estimate because of its ability to break this chain or this movement of the contaminant through the water cycle. So to explain that a little further, the nice thing about granular activated carbon is it captures the PFAS and it can be regenerated, and again, more study has to be done on it, but the way they regenerate granular activated carbon is they heat it to a very high temperature. That high temperature under certain circumstances can destroy the PFAS compounds. So that's one advantage of using granular activated carbon. There are other very effective treatment technologies. Reverse osmosis works very well. However, reverse osmosis can generate a concentrated waste stream. That concentrated waste stream has to go somewhere. It has to go through a wastewater treatment plant that may not be designed to treat PFAS, and it winds up going directly into a receiving body. Or it can go into deep well injection, or it can go into a landfill. So we're trying to break that cycle. That's one of the reasons we chose granular activated carbon. However, I want to make it clear we do not dictate what water systems use to treat their water. They are free to use any technology that's proven to remove PFAS to below the levels of the MCLs. So even though we use granular activated carbon, a system could come in and say, we're going to use RO in our system. And that's fine, as long as they can demonstrate that that meets or can reduce the contamination to below the MCLs, they're free to use whatever treatment technology they decide on, and we agree with. We have a laboratory certification section of the rule. They do have to follow an EPA certified methodology for testing this, and that is described in the rule. There is a minimum detection capability required, and we will be requiring third-party proficiency testing to make sure that we can give them a sample with a known amount and compare it to what their analysis is, so that we can have confidence in the numbers that these labs are providing us. Very quickly on the regulatory impact statement, we did a cost estimate. So the cost for sampling, a very conservative cost for sampling across the state in these 2,700 supplies, is around $6.4 million, and that's based on our experience with our statewide sampling. We pay about $300 a sample to have it analyzed. We pay about $300 a sample to have a contractor collect that sample. So we use the worst case scenario where a supply would have a contractor come in and basically pay $600 per sample. Treatment installation was estimated to be $11 million for those 22 systems that we think will have an issue with the MCLs. O&M costs were calculated at $326,000 annually to maintain and operate those treatment systems. The benefits were addressed qualitatively. It's very difficult to quantify health problems that people don't have. So that's one of those things that's very difficult to quantify, and it's hard to do a cost-benefit analysis with people's health. So that's pretty much it. I think we've got a couple of minutes if folks have questions. I know that was a lot of information very quickly. So could you come up and, Jim, if you wanted to. Yeah,
oh, sure, that's fine. Or I can grab a microphone too here that I'll take around. Testing. Okay, we're on. So here, I'll open it for you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I was wondering if these MCLs would cover the water that all Michigan citizens drink?
It covers the water that a majority of Michigan citizens drink, not all. It does not cover private wells.
Right there, or that one.
It doesn't cover private wells, and it doesn't cover the smaller water supplies, say a campground or a rest area that you may stop at, and it doesn't. It's what we call a non-transient, non-community water system that doesn't serve the same people for a long period of time. So we don't regulate private wells with these MCLs.
Okay, Eric, we got a question over here, sir.
Yes, I just wondered if there are any PFAS on paper that is coated in plastic.
Not that I'm aware of, but you know, we can have MPAR take a look at it.
Okay, good idea.
Good question.
I'm not aware of it.
Right back here.
Earlier you mentioned exposure over long periods of time. What is long period of time? Hours, days, minutes, months, years, centuries? That's a gray area.
For in the drinking water, it's people that drink the same water for 6 months or longer per the year. It's defined. It's used to define what we call a community water system or a non-community water system. That's where we have people drinking the same water for longer periods of time, as opposed to if you go into a gas station and it's only serving a very transient. You don't drink that water every day.
But you mentioned it bioaccumulates, correct?
Correct.
For example, we love to camp here in Michigan. We go back to the same campgrounds year after year after year after year.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah, it's a very good point.
Okay, thanks. Do you have a question, ma'am? Yeah.
Yeah, are you going to post this presentation where we can get copies
I
of it?
think we can do that. Yeah.
Yeah, we can do that. And if you signed up an email, put your email out, we'll send an email out and let you know where it is. Yep.
I wanted to follow up on that previous question about the well systems. Am I correct in that is 1 in 4 people in Michigan, that 25% of Michigan people are on wells, private wells?
Yeah, it's about 25%. You're correct.
All right, so that's a pretty big number.
Yeah.
That's 1 in 4.
It is.
Okay, I just think that's important.
But under the safe drinking, we don't regulate drinking. We rely on our public health partners to look at private wells and help folks
Yeah, I do understand that, but that can't be ignored either.
Oh, absolutely not.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, thank you.
No,
Thank you. Couple more questions and we got to start the hearing. So, yes.
Why haven't you tested source water? And
We-
what's the reasoning behind that?
We did test source water in the statewide sampling. However, in this, in the PFAS drinking water rules, we are not going to have them. The cost is a concern. So at $600 a sample, some of these smaller supplies, we are concerned about what's actually going in the distribution system. So that's why we don't test the source water in the PFAS rule. Now, we did test source water in the statewide sampling.
Okay. Dave, did any questions come in through the email? Okay. Yeah, so if you're watching the live stream and you do submit a question, if there's a delay or something, we're tracking those and we'll send them to our staff that are here today. Okay, well, we got to start the public hearing. So we're going to take a quick, probably 3-minute or so break to get set up for the hearing. So if you want to stretch your legs for a minute, we'll be right back and we'll be starting in about 3 minutes. So sit tight.